Welcome to CCG China and the World Dialogue Series. Power Narratives in a Changing World, Implications for US-China Cooperative Rivalry, a conversation with Harvard scholar Professor Joseph Nye. This program is presented by the Center for China and Globalization. Please welcome the host of this session, CCG President Dr. Wang Huiyao. Dr. Wang, over to you.
Hello, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning. It depends where you are. And thank you for tuning in. We are very honored and very pleased to have Professor Joseph Nye with us today for CCG's China and the World Dialogue Series. And actually, CCG is a leading think tank in China that has been ranked top 64 by the University of Pennsylvania, and also we are also the only think tank in China that has United Nations special consultant status. But of course, this China and World Series we have been conducting since last year, the pandemic. We already featured a number of well-known international opinion leaders and scholars like Thomas Friedman, and of course tonight we are with Joseph Nye. We also have other professors like we had Graham Allison, and of course we're going to have a number of more coming up as well. Last year we also did with Wolfgang Ischinger, John Thornton, and also many more well-known international scholars. So Professor Nye actually is a university distinguished service professor, Amherst, and also former dean of the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. He received his bachelor's degree from Princeton University, and he has a Rhodes scholarship to the Oxford University, and he's had his PhD in political science from Harvard University. So he has worked in 3 government agencies, so a very impressive career he has. From 1977 to 79, Joe served as a deputy to the Undersecretary of State for Security Assistance, Science and Technology, and chaired the National Security Council Group on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. So actually, in recognition of his service, he received the highest Department of State accommodation, the Distinguished Honor Award. And also in 1993 and 1994, he was a chair of the National Intelligence Council, which coordinates intelligence estimate for the president. He was awarded the Intelligence Community Distinguished Service Medal. And also the other part is in 1994 to 1995, he served as Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs, where he has won the Distinguished Service Medal. So Joseph is very famous for his academic and also the scholar career. And I remember I was at Harvard Kennedy School, 11, 12 years ago. You were so kind to actually interview with us, and also we had a book that you have also wrote a preface for us. So I really appreciate that. And of course, Joe is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Science, of the American Academy of Diplomacy, and of the British Academy. And also in a recent survey of the international relations scholars, Professor Nye was ranked as the most influential scholar on American foreign policy. And also in 2011, Foreign Policy named him one of the top 100 global thinkers. So Professor Joe, today we are really pleased to have you, and perhaps you can say a few words to our online audience, in China and elsewhere.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you and to visit the Center for China and Globalization, even if it's only virtually. I look forward to the day when we can once again greet each other personally. But I think the topic of how power is changing in the world and how that's going to affect the relations between the United States and China is one of the absolute central topics of our century. In the recent book that I published, Do Morals Matter, in the last chapter, I say that there are two great power shifts going on in this century. One is a power shift from west to east, which means from basically Europe and the Atlantic to the Pacific and Asia. If you think about the world in, let's say, 1800, Asia was half of the world's population and half of the world's economy. By 1900, Asia was still half the world's population, but only 20% of the world's economy. And that was because of the Industrial Revolution in Europe and North America. And I think what we're seeing in this century is a return to normality, normal proportions. And it's a long process, but I think it's an extraordinarily important power shift. Many people see this as the rise of China, and certainly China has been central to it, but also it starts really with the rise of Japan after the Meiji Restoration, and it will continue also with the rise of India. So Asia is obviously China is a big part of Asia, but Asia is a broader concept. So how do we manage that power transition from west to east in a way which is beneficial for all countries and which doesn't break down into great power rivalries which are destructive? That is one of the great power shifts. The other great power shift is what I would call vertical rather than horizontal. And that's the power shift from governments to non-governmental and transnational actors. And this is driven by technology and by changes in not economic, but in ecological globalization, things like pandemics and climate change, which don't respect boundaries and which no government can control working alone, but has to, in fact, control by working with other governments. And that's why in my book, I talk about the fact that the first type of power shift, the one that I would call horizontal, is one that can lead to what you call power over, competitive power, in which we think in traditional terms of power over other countries. But when you look at this other power shift, the vertical, from governments to transnational, that requires a different form of power, which I call power with rather than power over, because no country can solve those problems alone. So if you take climate change, for example, China cannot solve climate change by itself. The United States can't solve it by itself. Europe can't solve it. It's going to have to be cooperative. And yet it's tremendously important for each of us. If the Himalayan glaciers melt, that's going to destroy agriculture in China. If the sea levels rise, that's going to put much of Florida underwater. But neither of us can deal with that acting alone. We have to work with each other. And that's the importance of power with. So what I argue in the book is that these two power shifts lead to emphasis on two different types of power, power over others and power with others. And we're going to have to learn to live in a world where we manage both simultaneously. And that's not easy. People always like things to be simple. It's either one or the other. In fact, it's going to be both.
Thank you, Joe. I think you illustrated very well. I mean, the power shift, of course, but also horizontally, power over to power with. Absolutely. I mean, you are the authority on power narrative, particularly the soft power. I mean, you have published 18 books and, of course, hundreds of articles, and you're also a familiar name in China and known as father of the soft power. As a matter of fact, your 1990 book, Bound to Lead, The Changing Nature of American Power, was published in China in 1992. and China CITIC Publishing House actually published also your 204 book, Soft Power, The Means to Succeed in World Politics in 2015. And of course, your most book that you're talking, that Do Moral Matter, President and Foreign Policy from Franklin Roosevelt to Trump, just published last year, absolutely add a lot of new dimensions. So I think CITIC Publishing is really looking forward to publish your new book in China. So perhaps, Joe, we could start our dialogue as well. And I think what you have just opened, very good, the theme of our discussion today. So you first coined the term soft power in your 1990 book, which is 30 years ago, that Bound to Lead, but also challenge the conventional view that the decline of American power. But America actually is still a very powerful country. And so how do you see the American soft power of since then, and what we can learn, and also for example, Americans still has universities, has best universities, attract talents from all over the world. And also, but given the Trump administration, what has been in the last several years, so what do you see the gains and losses of American soft power, which you have invented that term?
Well, soft power is the ability to influence others through attraction rather than coercion or payment. And I first developed this idea back in, as you said, in 1989 and 90, when there was a widespread belief at the time that America was in decline. And I thought that was incorrect. And but after I totaled up the usual resources of military power and economic power and so forth, I said, there's still something missing, which is the ability to attract. And that's why I developed this concept of soft power. Now, if you look back over the years, American soft power goes up and down over time. In the last 4 years under President Trump, we've seen a considerable loss of American soft power. Trump's populist nationalism and his attitudes in general made America less attractive. And I think that the last 4 years have been bad years for American soft power. You can measure that by looking at public opinion polls like Pew poll or Gallup poll and so forth of international opinion. On the other hand, I think it's likely that American soft power will recover under President Biden. He's already reversed some of the things that Trump did, which were particularly unpopular, such as the withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accords or withdrawal from the World Health Organization. And so those are things that help. In addition, his attitudes more generally, I think, are less nativist, nationalist, and therefore will make the United States more attractive to other countries. But does it indicate American decline? No. I mean, the interesting thing to me is that there are always beliefs that America's in decline. It comes in cycles. And what they miss is that the ability of the Americans to be resilient, to regenerate themselves. Take the 1960s. The United States was extremely unpopular around the world because of the Vietnam War. But by the 1970s and 80s, American soft power had been restored. And so in that sense, while we've had a bad 4 years under Trump, I don't regard that as a sign of American decline. I think it's more a typical of the cycles that we've gone through in the past. And I expect that we'll probably recover from this one as we have from others in the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. And but we know that the world has really changed quite a lot compared with the 90s and and the end of last century, for the first 20 years of this century, we see the globalization really expanding rapidly, and also multinationals being operating worldwide, and also somehow as they're operating worldwide, but then also that they're probably not really benefiting enough their home country or their coast country, where we see the gap. For example, in the U.S. is between rich and poor is widening, and so that will generate a lot of populism, nationalism. What do you think about this kind of deglobalization? Really has a damage of the soft power, not only for the U.S. but for other countries as well. So in terms of we're seeing setbacks for the soft power, because I think that when people have enough hard power, as you said, everybody looks for attraction, want to be more attractive, and then soft power actually add more values to that. But now we are having the world getting harder and harder in terms of infrastructure. The soft, gentle part is disappearing a little bit. So how can we address that?
Well, I think you're right that one of the things that globalization has done is produce challenges to different groups within domestic society, and that is stimulated populism and nationalistic reactions. So if you're a factory worker in, let's say, the middle of the United States, and you lose your job because the job has gone to China or to Vietnam, you're not likely to be in favor of globalization. And you'll react against this, and that's many of those people wound up being voters for President Trump. And then again, I think you could argue that this increased the inequalities, that while some people benefited from globalization, others didn't. And that rising inequality is another tension on the political system. So a country's soft power depends not just on the words that it says, but on the deeds that it does and the way it practices its own values at home. In that sense, I think that what we've seen is globalization has produced a degree of populist reaction, which has produced a polarization in politics, which has undercut the attractiveness or soft power of the United States. And I think that is a real factor. I think one of the things that President Biden is doing is focusing on his domestic agenda to try to cure many of those aspects. And I think that he is headed in the right direction for that. But I think it's definitely true that globalization produces a reaction, and the reaction can in fact undercut soft power. Doesn't mean the soft power is less important, but it does mean that it's harder to maintain under conditions like that. What you see when you have disruptive social change is a tendency to populism and nationalism. And you see this in many countries. And that nationalism is attractive to people inside the country, but almost by definition, since it sets a country apart in an antagonistic role, it's not attractive to others. So, I mean, this is a problem for the United States. It's a problem for China too. If you take the so-called wolf warrior diplomacy, that's very popular inside China as part of the response to Chinese nationalism. It's not very popular to other countries.
Yeah, I think that your mention of the soft power is really, I think, something probably go down in history as something really to make the world more friendly, more charming, more attractive. People really paying attention, country paying attention to its soft power, and I think also you gave quite a good comment on when you actually wrote an article in Wall Street Journal in 2005 on the rise of Chinese soft power, and citing Yao Ming, and also the film Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and also 2008 Summer Olympics. But also, I think one of the soft power probably is that China now trying to have a lot of students studying in the United States. We hope that more American students studying in China, but also outbound tours, about 100 million before pandemic. But also, China has a 5,000 years history, and also the Confucianism, and also now some new soft ideas really getting into the population, like President Xi's Green Mountains, Gold Mountain. This environmental concept is really getting a hold in China, and also I can see for example, the collectivism, a bit of that 5,000 years history is helping China fighting pandemic as well. So what do you see the China soft power, and what can be done to improve, or maybe you could add, or because I think you'd be really a great observer of different countries' soft power, and not only United States.
Well, China's soft power has many sources. One, of course, is traditional Chinese culture, which is very attractive. And indeed, the very idea of soft power can be traced back to great Chinese thinkers like Lao Tzu. In other words, I may have coined the words soft power, but the concept of influencing others by attraction is an ancient Chinese philosophy. So Chinese traditional culture is a source of soft power for China. Another major source of soft power for China is China's remarkable economic performance. I mean, China has raised hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in the last 40 years. And this is widely admired, and it provides attraction and influence for China. So I think if there are deep sources for China's soft power, I think there are also problems in China's soft power. One is when you have conflicts with your neighbors, for example, as China has with many countries related to the South China Sea, or where you have, problems, let's say, about the borders with India, that makes it hard to generate soft power in those countries. I mean, you can set up a Confucius Institute in New Delhi to teach Chinese culture, but they're not going to attract Indians if Chinese soldiers are killing Indian soldiers on the Himalayan borders. So one problem for Chinese soft power is the existence of these conflicts, about territorial conflicts with a number of neighbors. Another limit on China's soft power is the insistence on tight party control of civil society. A great deal of a country's soft power is produced not by its government, but by its civil society. And that makes the country more attractive and more resilient. If the party insists on clamping down on everything in civil society, it makes it less flexible, less attractive. So if you have a creative genius who's produced by Chinese civil society, the best thing to do is to celebrate that, not to try to control it. And we saw this just this week with this Chloe Zhao, the Chinese film director who won the Oscar for Best Director. And that should be celebrated in China, not censored.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's of course sometimes they have a different interpretations on that, but I think China probably with a 1.4 billion people population, and then the standards, and also measure the soft power is a gradual process. I would say probably, for example, that given a 5,000 years history, given the collectivism society, and also maybe people willing to sacrifice a little individual freedom, but for the sake of a community, which has demonstrated very well at this COVID-19 fighting in China, which what happened in India is very tragic. We've been seeing these days. But in China, basically everywhere you go, there's no more COVID-19 cases now. So yeah, I think some of those things is also a changing dynamic. Of course, there's always room to improve, absolutely. But I think, giving a country as big as China, and also everything is experimenting forward. We probably take a lot of different perspectives. And I agree with you, the 5,000 years history, the culture, and also how to really stimulate the individual innovative spirit is a constant subject for China to get more master of that. So this is really great. We talk about this, we find out what are the things we can do better, what are things America can do better, and of course, the world can learn from each other, of course. But in your recent book, I mean, this is really interesting that Do Morals Matter? You have a recent new book, which just published last year. So you provided an action analysis of the roles of ethics in the U.S. foreign policy and of American era after 1945 through each president, from Franklin Roosevelt to President Trump. So now we are facing a more challenging, much challenging world, more complex world now. And so what do you think about President Biden, since he's about 100 days already in his office? So you just analyzed the 14th president before him. So what do you think about President Biden? And also,
well,
yeah.
No, I say Biden it's much too soon to judge him historically, because we only have seen 3 months of his presidency. But on the 3 months that we've seen, the 100 days, he seems to be doing pretty well. In other words, President Trump took a position of being divisive for political support, and his popularity in the American public never rose above 50%. President Biden has taken a different approach, which is to try to appeal more broadly, and his popularity is somewhere measured around 57%. And that's an indication of a different style of leadership that Biden has than what Trump has. I think that is a good sign for a promising future. But as I said, it's much too early to judge at this stage.
But do you think that both President Biden and actually President Xi, they both attended this global summit on climate change, with the world is facing pandemic, facing climate change? Do they demonstrate some kind of moral leadership? I think to really, if China and US can work together on this pandemic fighting, even more so maybe on pandemic fighting, we probably have a much more organized world. But I think that that kind of moral leadership is, for both President Biden and President Xi, is really important these days, aren't they?
Oh, I think that's exactly right. I've argued that we have to think of the US-China relationship as what I call a cooperative rivalry. There will be areas of rivalry. For example, different views on the navigation of the South China Sea. That will be an area of traditional type of rivalry. But when it comes to ecological interdependence, which is illustrated by climate or by pandemics, viruses don't respect nationality. They just want to reproduce themselves. So they cross borders without any respect to what governments say or politics. And the same thing is true with greenhouse gases. In that sense, we have to be able to realize that ecological interdependence, which is a new form of globalization, is one where it's going to require cooperation. So while there'll be a rivalry on certain areas, there has to be cooperation at the same time. I was very pleased to see that that you had at this virtual climate summit, which which Biden had last week, to see the presence of President Xi, President Putin, and others, because it really is essential that we overcome the rivalries in the areas where we must cooperate, because there's no alternative to cooperation.
Yeah, absolutely. So you actually said that in the past that the development of soft power need not be a zero-sum game. So so if we can have establish a cooperative rivalry and but where area we need to compete, but where area we need to collaborate and cooperative, become the norm of the time would be very good. But also we try to find attractive parts of each other. So we can national interests of China and also the United States are partly converge. I mean, in terms of fighting a pandemic, in terms of climate change, but also partly conflict, as you mentioned as well. So the soft power probably can reinforce each other. So if we can find those soft spots and really press on that, that'd be really great. And so that easy for China and US to manage the conflicts. And so do you think that the US and both US and China can gain the soft power from cooperating? Any more areas we can collaborate? For example, President Biden announced that the US is going to propose a 2.3 trillion on infrastructure. And you probably know China in the past 4 decades has built a super infrastructure. They have 2/3 of the global high-speed train networks now, and out of the 10 largest container ports, 7 of them in China, and also longest bridges and things like that. And so can we really work on that? And an Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is one of good example that China is working with European countries, except US and Japan now. Maybe we could work with US to upgrade that to a World Infrastructure Investment Bank so that we can help developed countries and maybe both US and others, and China too, so that we can cooperate with more interest of each other. And I remember last time when we at the same panel with Boal webinar, you talk about have a China use set up a COVID-19 fighting fund to work on that. So what do you think about those areas that can increase our soft power with each other, so we can collaborate even more so?
I think that's correct. Soft power doesn't have to be zero sum. If, for example, China becomes more attractive in the United States and U.S. becomes more attractive in China, that can help both of us to overcome our differences, our conflicts. So some years ago, I remember co-authoring an article with a distinguished Chinese scholar, Wang Huiyao of Beida. We pointed out in that article that soft power can be positive sum in which both sides can benefit simultaneously. Not always, but in some instances. And that's why it's important for the US and China to find areas where they can cooperate, because we'll both look more attractive in the eyes of other countries if we do so. Most countries don't want to have to choose in a harsh way between China and the US. And to that extent, when we're seen to be cooperating, particularly on the production of global public goods, you can imagine that increasing China's soft power and increasing American soft power at the same time. I did, as you mentioned, I did mention the idea that the US and China could work together on this whole idea of strengthening the health systems of poor countries, including their vaccine capabilities, which would be good for us as well as good for them, and which would also enhance the soft power of both our countries.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And that China and the U.S. There's many ways actually being the 2 largest economy in the world. I mean, also particularly the U.S. has been building this post-war global governance system. that China is actually benefiting from this system, also trying to add on, trying to work more actively on that. It's enormous areas to work together. So you actually, I noticed that you don't really like this the metaphor, Thucydides trap, that maybe the rising power challenges ruling power, and then you said that either there's a challenging part of it, there's also fear part of it, but we make a self-fulfilling prophecy on that, but let's not overemphasize that. So that's really an interesting thing. Maybe you can elaborate a bit on that. That's really an interesting thing, because really we don't want to get stuck into kind of a deadly confrontation, because after all, we are so much interdependent now.
Well, I think that's right. I think there's some validity in the fact that a rise in power can create fear in an established power, and that can be a source of conflict, but it doesn't have to be. Even thinking back to the Peloponnesian War, which Thucydides described, he said the causes of the war were the rise in the power of Athens and the fear it created in Sparta. We can control the amount of fear. In other words, if we become too obsessive about our fear of each other, then we could fall into something like the Thucydides trap. My own view is that we don't have to succumb to that type of fear. Basically, as I see it, China does not pose an existential threat or threat to the existence of the United States. China is not trying to take over the United States, and the United States doesn't pose an existential threat to China. We're not trying to take over China. So in that sense, we will compete, but we should limit the fears. It's not as though it's life or death fears. In that sense, going back to Thucydides, the rise in the power of China is something which is likely to continue. There's not much we can do about that. Only China will do something about it, which is how it behaves domestically. But the fear that creates in the United States is something we can do something about, which is to not over exaggerate China, not become overly fearful. Competition is healthy. Frankly, the idea that the Americans will improve some things at home, such as infrastructure, because China is leading the way, let's say on high-speed rail, that can be healthy. But if it becomes fearful or obsessively fearful, it can become destructive. So my view is that we should be careful of the language we use. I don't like this language some people are using about a new Cold War between the United States and China. I think that's a misreading of history. It implies a deeper and more intractable conflict than is really the case. If you look back to the real Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, there was almost no economic interdependence, whereas with US and China, you find just the opposite, $500 billion of trade. If you look back on the real Cold War, there was no social interdependence, whereas today, more than 3 million Chinese come to the United States as tourists and 300,000 as students. And so you have much greater economic interdependence, social interdependence, and the new aspects that I mentioned, ecological interdependence. During the Cold War, we were less worried about climate change or pandemics. So there are reasons for why this increase in globalization and interdependence make us or urge us to be careful about not using metaphors like the Cold War, which were true for a time of history, but not necessarily accurate descriptions of the current period in history.
Yes, thank you, Joe. I think absolutely, you're a great promoter of the peace. I think the word that about Cold War is really obsolete, and absolutely right. You know, we have economic dependence, we have a social dependence, we have a ecological dependence, we have a technology dependence probably as well. And so it doesn't really make sense to decouple or to really to confront. But you have also, I remember last time when you were in China, I went to see you. You talk about cooperative rivalry as well, and that is really a great term I think you're using. So for cooperative rivalry, how can we do better on that? I mean, there's you know, we see that in the U.S. Congress is keeping passing new regulations or new bills, and the think tanks putting out all kinds of reports depicting Cold War is happening. So I mean, you've been experiencing all those. You have been in the Ministry of Department of Defense and all those security issues. You've been teaching power of the world geopolitics for a lifetime. So what can we do better to have this cooperative rivalry relationship?
Well, one thing is to strengthen the ties that we have. I mean, the students, the visitors, the communication. These are important aspects of what I call social interdependence, which help to develop deeper understanding between the societies, and that's important. The other is that on the economic interdependence, there will be some areas where there will be decoupling of areas that touch high security. For example, Americans are very worried about Huawei or ZTE controlling 5G telecommunications in the US for security reasons. I don't think you can see more economic interdependence there, just as China has not wanted to allow Google or Facebook to operate freely inside China because of security reasons. So there'll be some areas where there'll be decoupling, but that doesn't mean we want to see overall economic decoupling, which would be extraordinarily costly for both countries. And then finally, this question of how do we manage the relationship overall so that we avoid miscalculations or accidents. You know, the people who talk about 1945 and the Cold War are picking the wrong date for historical analogy. As Henry Kissinger points out, 1914 is something we should pay more attention to. All the great powers in Europe at the time did not want World War I. They expected in their competition in the Balkans to have a short, sharp conflict which would redress the balance of power and things would go back to normal. Instead, through miscalculations and failure to manage the relationship, to manage the competitive parts of the relationship, they wound up with 4 years of war, which destroyed 4 empires and destroyed the centrality of Europe in the global balance of power. We have to be extremely cautious and careful that we don't allow some incident in the South China Sea or over Taiwan or something to lead us into a something which nobody intends with great unintended consequences. And that's going to require constant communication. So we need to enhance our cooperation in areas of interdependence where it's possible to cooperate. But on the areas which are competitive, we have to be much more cautious and attentive to how we communicate with each other to make sure that we don't have miscalculations. Those are the two things I think we have to do to avoid this relationship becoming a zero-sum game. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I remain relatively optimistic about the long run, but humans make mistakes. Well, that's the nature of being a human, and so we have to guard against those mistakes.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. I think, as you said, communication and also avoid misunderstanding, and it's also important to really to promote mutual understanding and avoid those kind of mistakes and disasters happen. But I remember well, you actually said, I mean, the Cold War is not possible. That there are several factors too. I mean, Americans shouldn't be worried about China because the geographically U.S. is so far with no friendly neighbors, Canada, Mexico, but also the energy. U.S. is already sufficient on energy now, and where China still need a lot of supply, and population. U.S. is probably the biggest in the developed world on the population, and of course also technology-wise. So U.S. has many things that are still leading, and so the worries on China, the concerns on China should really be less so, I suppose. And whereas I think China has a lot more people interested in learning from U.S. We have 400,000 students want to study in the United States, and also, as you said, 3 million tourists going there too. So, but China is also now is one of the largest trading nations with almost 100 countries now, and so hopefully the benefit produced by both sides can really cut down the mistrust. So how can we really build up some more trust? And then, I mean, it's very valuable to hear your sober mind that at this critical time, and also we are now 100 days after President Biden get into the office, how we can really shape a little different perspective for the future of Sino-U.S. relations.
Well, one of the things that both of us have to worry about is the rise of nationalism in our two countries. I mentioned earlier that the effect of globalization on creating inequality and disrupting jobs and so forth led to more populist nativist nationalism in the United States, and that produced voters for President Trump. But let's be frank, there's also rising nationalism in China. If you look at the Chinese web, you'll notice enormous nationalism, and there's the feeling that in China that there's still this argument about overcoming the 19th century history, and as a form of recruiting support, when you do things like wolf warrior diplomacy, that's very popular inside China, but those things are not healthy in terms of creating trust in other countries. So it's interesting. Take, for example, the program China 2025 about technologies. That made sense inside China. It created fear in Washington. The fact that China was going to try to replace the United States in a whole series of important technologies created fear in Washington. Or when President Xi Jinping said that China would be #1 in artificial intelligence by 2030, that meant it was read in Washington as well. China intends to replace the United States by 2030. So it might have been a good goal in terms of recruiting national support inside China, but there's always, for every political leader, there's what's called the two audience problem. One audience is internal, the other audience is external. And sometimes the messages that play well internally play badly externally. So I think on both of our sides, given the rise in nationalism that's produced to some extent by globalization or the reaction to globalization, we have to be very careful about the two audience problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's you're absolutely correct. I think that if it's a peaceful competition, maybe let's handle a bit more on the domestic side, as well as you said that China is trying to avoid those kind of a populism, but the same is true for the United States, and we really need to maybe make the internal narrative and international narrative maybe combined a bit as well, and For example, you said American has this populism, also the gap, between rich and poor, also this racial differences that is widening as well. Whereas China, trying to, I think what China has been careful in the last several decades is trying to minimize the gap a bit. Even though the rural and urban still have a lot of differences, but at least China is trying to lift 800 million people out of extreme poverty, so that they don't really generate so much populism and dissatisfaction with the globalization or opening up of China. So I think that lessons can be learned for both countries on that as well. And the problem is how we can really get multinationals and all those big players. As you said, we may need more non-government, non-profit philanthropy and all those things to work together for the globalization. So we have an inclusive and balanced globalization, particularly developing countries now with all the things happen on the COVID in the developing countries. So it's absolutely important that the US and China work together. We just, last weekend, we celebrated the 15th anniversary of the ping-pong democracy. The slogan then was friendship first, competition second. That was a very, very interesting one. But also I really hope that veteran professor like you've been seeing all the ups and downs. So what's your take on the future of Sino-US relations? I noticed you have given quite a few scenarios. I mean, for the future, for those 5 scenarios you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, one can imagine a variety of scenarios. Anytime you try to guess the future, you have to realize there is no one future. There are many possible futures, and they're affected by events that we don't know about, which are unexpected. And they're affected also by our own actions and how we choose what behaviors we're going to follow. So one can imagine futures of US-China relations which are bad and ones that are good. And we have to then say, what are the things we can do that can steer ourselves more toward the good relations, which are beneficial to both. It's interesting, if you look back historically, since 1945, we've gone through a series of relationships for the first 20 years or so. Things were pretty tough. After all, US and Chinese soldiers fought each other on the Korean Peninsula in 1950s. So we had 20 years, if you want, of tense relationship. Then, as you pointed out, we had ping pong diplomacy and the easing of relations. You had the Nixon visit to Beijing, and you had another 20 years then of improving relationships. Then you had a period where with the Clinton administration, the desire, as with a rising China, to integrate China into the international order through the World Trade Organization and so forth. And then that lasts nearly 20 years, but you have, with the period of the arrival of Donald Trump, 2015, 16, and so forth, a feeling among many Americans that China was not playing fair, that it was subsidizing state-owned enterprises and stealing intellectual property and militarizing islands in the South China Sea that President Xi had promised President Obama he would not do. And there was a reaction against this. So we started another cycle. So we've gone through ups and downs roughly on 20 years. If you use that same 20-year cycle, we're in the middle. If it starts around 15, then 25 is 10 years. I hope that it doesn't have to last that long, but it's quite possible that we'll have intense competition for 20 years. My own personal view is what I said earlier, that I don't think China is an existential threat or a threat to the existence of the United States, or that the United States is threat to the existence of China. So in that sense, I think that you could imagine some period, who knows, maybe we're talking about 2035, where you'll see the cycle turn toward better relations again. Maybe we can benefit and have it sooner than that. But as any time you predict the future, you have to realize that history is always full of surprises. That every time you think you know something, there's going to be something which you haven't taken into account. So that makes it all the more important that we try to use our own actions cautiously so that we don't get the wrong sorts of surprises.
Mm-hmm. Great, and absolutely I agree with you. You know, China is no threat to the United States, and hopefully U.S. is not a threat in China as well. I mean, because U.S. already has so much abundance around its countries and very rich in all kind of resources. You know that geographically so far away from China as well. You know, we are a center of China and globalization, a think tank based in Beijing. But I read one of your syndicate that you talk about, you know, 2030, 5 scenarios of international order of that. And you know, number one is that maybe the liberal international order is coming to the end because of the you know, populism and also other you know, political forces. And also you mentioned about the second is scenarios maybe you know, something to the 1930 scenario that with massive unemployment, economic depression, and also a politician take advantage of that to become a more populist protectionism. So that's, you know, scenario number 2. Number 3, you were talking about, and China may also be more active, dominating the global order on that. And then also, you know, when the GDP of China gets bigger to the United States, and maybe also multinational interest in China and things like that. And the fourth, of course, you talk about the green global agenda, where you know, climate and all those things changes, and the COVID Marshall Plan probably as well. And also the final one is there's more similarity. Maybe maybe we can coexist. You know, I mean, you are really a great predictor. I mean, we love to see your crystal ball for the future of the global. I mean, we talk about China, U.S. now. Let's talk about global. Yeah.
Well, I do think that you're going to see an increased importance of the green agenda, simply because this is something which obeys the laws of physics and biology, not politics. And as more and more people in more and more countries become aware of the importance of climate change and of the dangers of things like pandemics, I think that's going to put pressure on political leaders to take these issues more seriously than they have in the past. But it's not going to totally replace traditional politics, but and traditional competition by any means. But it will, I think, become increasingly important. And that means that the cooperative dimensions are going to have to increase. Now, we could still, we meaning the world, the political leaders, could still make mistakes and fail to see this or react to it. But I do think that's a source of potential optimism that that this agenda is going to be increasing because of physics and biology. So I think that of the various scenarios that I sketched out for a post-COVID world in that Project Syndicate column, I thought the gradual evolution of the world as we see it now was the most likely, but that I put more emphasis on the green agenda than I would have, let's say, before COVID. And so, as I said, I remain relatively optimistic that we can pull through this period.
Yeah, great. You're cautiously optimistic because we are absolutely dependent on each other. Maybe one of the questions I can talk with you is that now the Professor Burns may be rumored to be the ambassador to China. I mean, I remember, I mean, 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when I was there, he's already there. And so what do you think that the new ambassadors or maybe the exchanges of those high-level contact that can really promote China-US relations? The first time we're having a public servant. I mean, he has a lot of experience on that, and also at Harvard. So also you've been working with him at Aspen as well. You're a great friend. What do you think about that?
Well, I think Nick Burns is an extraordinarily skillful professional diplomat, and but it's also true that all we have now is a rumor. And in the American political process of appointing ambassadors, you have to get approval of the White House, and then you have to get approval of the Senate. And we're a long way from any certainty about whether he will be the ambassador. But I think the fact that the Biden administration is, by rumor at least, considering somebody as one of our most skillful professional diplomats to assign to Beijing is a good sign. It means that we're taking the relationship seriously. Nick would be tough if he's ambassador, as he should be, just like the Chinese ambassador in Washington has to be tough. That's his job. But he also has to be businesslike and professional and look for areas of cooperation simultaneously. I think those are characteristics of Nick Burns as a person. But as I said, this is all premature because really nothing has been announced formally. However, if it does come about, I would regard it as a good sign.
Mm-hmm. Great. And so we have some questions from media we collected as well, because they know that you're talking with us. So we have, for example, we have a China Radio International, and they were asking if they are supposed to tell the young people of this year about 3 major events, except for the 2 wars that changed the world during the past 100 years. What would be your choice? The third event that would say. So this is from one of the China media as well.
Events, by their definition, are almost always surprises. There was a British Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan, who was asked a question about what's going to happen in British foreign policy next year, given this trend or that trend. And he said, the trouble, my dear boy, is events. And so you never know how the events are going to turn out. I mean, who would have predicted COVID in 1919? And yet that had a profound effect on all our economies and the world economy. So I think in that sense, it's hard to know what events. What worries me are, as I said, miscalculations. And in which people think if I push a little harder there, I'll get what I want, and there's pushback, and before you know it, people are getting further along than they want to be in their tensions. So I worry about events that, by definition, can't be properly described or spelled out now, but that could be taking us by surprise.
Yeah, we have to be really cautious on that. And we have another news from the Hongxin News in China, and basically saying that after the outbreak of the pandemic, and also particularly after the last 4 years of the Trump administration, so there's a growing nationalism in both China and the United States, and also led to the exaggeration of the sense of threat between our 2 countries. As you mentioned, the power can be divided into 2 types: power over others and power with others. So the recent communication between China and the United States on climate change shows the importance of a rivalry cooperative. And also, in your opinion, how the concept of power with others can be more deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. And how we can really strengthen that, power with others rather than over others.
Well, I think to go back to something I said earlier, building on the interdependence we have, both economic and social, is one way to deepen a sense of understanding of each other's societies and to thereby somewhat reduce suspicion. Personal contacts don't automatically produce friendships, but in fact, interpersonal contacts do help to increase understanding or empathy toward the other. And so that's one thing we can do. The other thing we can do is when there are areas where we can cooperate, such as issues related to pandemics or climate change, we should definitely pursue those. And I think we're making some progress in that direction.
Great. We have another question from People's Weekly as well as a media in China. It basically was asking, President Xi has proposed the concept of a community with shared future for the mankind. And so China is actually thinking globally, and the President Xi has mentioned that at the Davos as well for the meeting, this year and also in 2017. So how can the world leaders, really work together with some common narrative? I mean, climate change is one, and so what else can we really minimize the differences and then maximize the similarities, as you also mentioned?
Well, I think the words that President Xi has expressed are welcome, but people watch deeds and ask whether words are met with deeds. So if we look at whether China is moving in the right direction on climate change, the speech that President Xi gave at the climate summit last week was very welcome. On the other hand, when we read the statistics, we notice that China is continuing to build new coal-fired plants. And some of these coal-fired plants will last for 30 and 40 years, putting out greenhouse gases. So I think people are going to want to ask, not just are there good words, but are there good deeds? That's true not just for China, it's true for the US. One of the interesting things is Biden's words on climate are good. He's now trying through executive actions and a program of decarbonizing the economy to see whether deeds can follow up those words. So basically, I would say deeds have to follow the words.
Yeah, so one final question from also China Review News Agency as well. So he said that Biden administration continued to identify China as a revisionist state and also as a chief strategic competitor. So would Biden administration, willing to maintain some healthy competition with China while collaborate with China, and also as we know that we are recently Richard Haas, the chairman of Council of Foreign Relations, proposed, maybe we should abandon some ideological differences and let's have 6 countries, US, China, Russia, India, EU, and the Republic of Japan, form kind of some consultation mechanism. So would that be really, because if we really cut the water into ideological divide and not really viewing the actually happening of every country in reality, how can we overcome this kind of the competition really become a strategic competitor or rivalry?
Well, those are good questions, and we do have mechanisms for coordination and consultation. I mean, we have 5 countries, if you want, in the UN Security Council. We have the group of 20, which is the 8 major economic forces in world politics. And we also have the prospects for bilateral consultations. So there are a number of mechanisms that we have which can help us to coordinate. We have to make sure, though, that again, not just that we are having mechanisms for this, but that we use them properly. And I think I was encouraged by the summit in Washington last week on the climate as an illustration that that is going to be possible to do that.
Great. So really appreciate, Joe, that you're taking the time to talk us. You know, you've been lives through for all those 50s, 60s, and you see all the historical events happening, and you really have this concept of a country soft power, which is really benefiting for us. We're actually quite, you've been really attractive. We had just about 800,000 viewers online to watch this, and I really appreciate what you said on the, China is not a threat, and also, we should really, it's a dependent world. We should really not think about decouple, maybe some few areas, but not, we have to live together, and also, Cold War mentality is not really great, and that is really, we should avoid that, or may abandon that. But also communication, you said, is so important, and people-to-people exchanges, and also, all those soft part that we should really increase. You give a lot of good advice to how U.S. and China can enhance soft power, and also with other countries too. So in the final conclusion remarks, what would you like to say to such a large audience? So we're hearing to live today. Yeah.
Well, we're all human. We're bound to make mistakes. There are bound to be tensions and competitions between Chinese and Americans, but we have to keep it in perspective. We have more in common and more to gain from cooperation, and we have to keep that perspective. So I think if we have an optimistic view about our potential to manage competition and to practice cooperation, I think we can look to a good future.
Great. So Professor Nye, thank you so much, and we appreciate your taking time to dialogue with us. We hope to see you next time, and also thank for our audience, and both in China and also other parts of the world also. So thank you, Professor Nye, very much, and good morning and good evening. Yes.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed our conversation.